Tonight, West African heads of states have given the Guinea junta exactly 1 year to set up and transition into a democratic state. We'll find out what else they've been saying at the extraordinary meeting and discuss this matter with the very best of brains in this country as we get to understand how to deal with the Guinea crisis in a more comprehensive manner. But the details after this break. You're welcome back. This is UPfront. My name is Raymond Darko. Now, ECOWAS is demanding the political regime in Guinea set up a transition period to return the country to civilian rule. This is supposed to happen within exactly a year from now. Also, they are asking the military grouping there to immediately undertake unconditional release of the president who was removed from office, Alpha Condé. These are the demands we understand are contained in the communique, which will soon be communicated to the rest of the world at the extraordinary summit held here in Accra. Now, we'll be getting into details of that particular summit and much more the reasoning that's gone into this. But tonight, my guests are the very best you'll find in this country and on the sub-region on this particular matter. Joining us already here in studio is a man who perhaps knows it all when it comes to Guinea. Dr. K.O. Amenin has been a former UN resident coordinator. Let's start from Chad. You've also been to Liberia, and then you spent some time in Guinea too. Yeah. So you understand that he knows what Guinea is and where it's supposed to be and what's been happening in that country. Now, joining us on Zoom is Dr. Emmanuel Bombande. He's a senior mediation advisor at the United Nations and has spent a lot of work and a lot of action in the sub-region, doing a lot of mediation work and fighting for peace. Here in Ghana, I'm sure you would have heard of him when it comes to the West African Network for Peace and how he's actually done so much work connected to that institution. Much more so, we'll be joined in the course of the conversation by Professor Vladimir Chidanso, who is the Dean of the Ghana Armed Forces Command and Staff College. I'm sure you'll find no better set of wonderful people for this conversation as we get to discuss the Guinea crisis and the best way forward. As the second extraordinary meeting to discuss that particular scenario is playing out and coming to an end with a press conference soon and scheduled to be here live on this network as we get that particular detail also for you. But first, let me get to put this in perspective. The first statement from ECOWAS did hint of similar directives to the military leadership in Guinea. Exactly how different, beyond the timeline specifically given, is this particular indication that we will not tolerate your ascension to power through means which are not free and fair and transparent elections? Let me start with you, Doc. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you.
I hope you are doing well.
Very well, thank you.
We'll be getting to know more about Guinea and how far we come with this particular crisis. But immediately, the dictation from ECOWAS is pretty simple. Release the man unconditionally, and secondly, make sure that you wind up and get them back onto a democratic path in a year. What do you think about it?
I think the conditions are quite customary. They're the type of conditions one would expect that the ECOWAS will put before the junta. They've done that in several areas, and I think normally discussions are going to be held around that with the junta. But whatever discussions that are going to be held, they would be held within the context of three concerns. The first concern is that the ECOWAS would want to be sure that this period within which the military has power is going to be a period which would not deteriorate into wrestling for power by various groups. Because when there's a coup, it means that people who were also in power had lost power, and there's a likelihood that they would also want to get back to power. By placing this period within the context of a transition, hopefully would make everybody understand that it's a temporary period. Okay. And therefore there's no need to, to think about, using force to come to power to take it away from them or whatever. The second is also the fact that you don't want to make coup d'etats attractive.
Okay.
So it should be clear to them that by seizing power, they will not be allowed to enjoy power. They have to place it within a certain context, and it's a very short context within which power should go back to those that will have to pass through the normal processes to be able to get it. The third element is that by putting the transition, I think discussions will be held with all the stakeholders in this period of transition, and then they would be able to look at how they would transition into constitutional government once more, and that what were the factors that really caused this coup to emerge, and therefore they should avoid the second time, and therefore be able to...
Much of that conversation I'll be having with you, but let me get to that Zoom link and bring in Dr. Emmanuel Bombande. Doc, the directive is pretty clear. It is almost like what ECOWAS said after its first meeting. Make sure you hand over power within the shortest possible time. In this case, 6 months to a year. And also make sure that Condé is freed unconditionally. A step in the right direction?
Good evening, Raymond, and good evening to all your viewers. It is a step in the right direction for the reason that ECOWAS is following its own blueprint. And I have in my hand here the ECOWAS protocol that is relating to the mechanism for conflict prevention, management, resolution, and peacekeeping and security. Basically, this mechanism under Article 2, subsection C is clear that ECOWAS seeks to promote and consolidate democratic governance as well as democratic institutions in each member state. So when a member state falls out of this, it is the responsibility of the collective ECOWAS leadership at the highest level of the authority of heads of state and governments to bring that state back into the fold. And that fold means respecting our own political convergence criteria. And so the 1 year transition is, if you would call it, the period that the authority of heads of state estimate to be the time in which all the necessary arrangements, which probably would include constitution making, can allow for that return. But I would want to come back to you and talk more about whether this in itself is adequate and whether it is not time for us to update these, precisely because we should not just be looking at the call for a return to constitutional order, but we should be looking also at what is it that will not make an environment in Guinea suitable again for a coup d'etat, just as we have talked about in Mali.
Well, that's interesting. I'm sure we are gearing up for a very wonderful conversation tonight. And if you just joined us, this is Upfront. Our conversation is the latest coming from the extraordinary summit. This summit is supposed to decide the way forward for the West African body ECOWAS on what to do with the Guinea situation. We know not long ago a military grouping had actually taken over the country, imprisoned or detained the President Alpha Condé. ECOWAS has been up and running on this matter. They come under a massive flood of attack for not being proactive enough, for not acting when they needed to do in the first place, and for not doing the things recommended by other institutions right before all of this became a big crisis on our hands. That is the conversation we are having tonight on Upfront. And joining me here in studio is a man who has done a lot of work, especially when it comes to UN coordination in Guinea, in Chad, and also in other West African and other African countries, and has a lot of competence. Dr. Manin is in the studio with me, and also joining us, you just heard there, is a Dr. Emmanuel Bombande. He's a senior mediation advisor, and also will be soon joined on the phone by Professor Vladimir Nchidanso, who's also going to help us appreciate where we have come from when it comes to this crisis and how well we are managing it. More importantly, some are fearing this is the just beginning of a return to the dark days where there were rampant coups on the continent. How do we prevent and avoid these? It's also part of the conversation we are having on Upfront until we tie the nice ribbons of the show later on. But for now, I'll be going to the phone lines in a jiffy. But let me come in studio. Dr. Mani, I asked us to take us to what really Guinea represents in this case and where we have come from when it comes to this crisis. So was this bound to happen after Condé was believed to have returned the country into constitutional rule? Was this supposed to be the path that the country will travel? Why are we where we are today?
It will be unfair to say it was bound to happen.
Okay.
I'd probably say it was likely. It was likely because it may appear that when President Conte died and we're going through a transition period that would have allowed the country to move from where it used to be a semi-autocratic state, having from 1958 been quite on the periphery of what democratic, liberal democracy is. One would have thought that we would have given ourselves some time to be able to put institutions and also the political culture that is necessary to be able to operate a liberal democracy. Unfortunately, that did not happen as it should have happened. There was a suspicion that the two groups that were vying for power, the locally bred political class and those that were coming from exile, could not understand what process to be put in place and could not trust each other so that we can move forward towards a liberal democracy. And therefore, the military intervened. And when the military intervened, it was clear the gentleman, the military leader, wanted to stay. And therefore, the two groups got together and with international support made sure that the transition period was very short. And therefore, Alpha Condé came to power. He came to power without really the full political culture that should accompany the political process that was being put in place. And therefore, one would have expected some disarticulations.
Oh, okay. So that's the conversation. But give me a second. Let me go to the phone line. Professor Vladimir Ntudansu joins us now. Prof, you're welcome to UPfront.
Thank you for having me.
We're getting upfront with this matter because it's perhaps the fear that we are returning to the dark days in the sub-region once more. Guinea has been given, especially the military junta there, a period to make sure they get back the state into a proper state run in a democratic way. That's civilian rule. And also, they've asked for an unconditional release of the man Alpha Condé. In the interim, are these what you expected? And is this something that would take us in the right path when it comes to resolving the crisis in Guinea?
Well, this is something not unexpected. The point is that I knew ECOWAS had no choice but to rely on the protocol of 2001. And if they were seen not to have invoked the spirit of that protocol, they would have done their work. So obviously they were repeating what they said at the inception of the coup. So that was to be expected. So there's nothing new. My only worry is that these are things that have been tried, tested, and have failed all the time. If you want democracy, it's not an event as if running a 100-meter race. So they start it and get it done in 10 minutes, 10 seconds, sorry, or under 10 seconds. Democracy is not like that. If you want democracy to really have the prospect of being consolidated, then you look at the history of democracy itself. You look at the specificity of the place, the history of where we are now today in Guinea. It's not a good history. The junta has come. Where do we go from here? If you stampede them, they may stay in power. And if you want democracy, there is a fine way of going about it. Doumbouya will just take off his military clothes and run elections tomorrow, and he is the president, and then you will accept him, isn't it? But is that what you want? I strongly suspect that when such things happen, we must help them in the transition period. If it takes 6 months, fine. 1 year, fine. 5 years, fine. But the transition must ensure democracy in the sense that there must be a reliable institution, first and foremost, a workable constitution, the participation of the large mass of the people, for them to understand the democratic culture. If these things are not there, then the divisions are still there, and they will go back to it through ethnicity, through whatever it is. But democracy does not know ethnicity or whatever it is. If there are good institutions, in which way are we helping them to do this, rather than asking them do this and do that? Yes, Alpha Conde, yes, release. Don't have a problem about it. But again, I thought there should have been a big diplomatic language there. That I would have said ECOWAS should have asked them to ensure the safety and security of the president at all times and release him as they have to. But to say unconditional release, well, if you know a little bit about security, the place is not smooth. If the junta feels that Conde is a threat, they will never release him. They will never do it. If they feel that somebody also will kill in his own interest, some people may be after him outside the junta doesn't do anything, you kill. It's a big security problem for the junta. So I thought there should have been a better security language, diplomatic language, to say we are expecting of you to ensure the safety and security of our country. It's broad enough to show that don't touch him. Make sure he's released in good time and that kind of thing. So very well, they've done what they have to do according to their protocol, and I'm not surprised. But I doubt if this is the way we should go.
Well, it's interesting. The Protocol on Good Governance and Democracy states in 1C specifically that the ECOWAS, as a guiding principle, has zero tolerance for power obtained or maintained by unconstitutional means. Is that not the basis for the kind of quest to get them to go back to what was supposed to be the case and the earlier indication of a suspension in the first place? Is this not the direction that everybody would have expected of them right from the beginning?
As I said already, I didn't expect them to go beyond the protocol. And I'm saying we've done it before. We've done it several times. None has succeeded in bringing back that democracy we want. That's what I'm saying. If you stampede them this way, your protocol is all right. Go by the protocol, but don't use the language that makes it seem as if. Let me give you a scenario, and I've given it already. Go back to constitutional rule as soon as possible, because we don't recognize unconstitutional overthrow of government, right?
Yeah.
That is the protocol.
Yeah.
So if today, as Dumbuya receives this message, he says, fine, next week we are going to election. I'm running. What will ECOWAS say? Nothing. He runs, he wins. We are back to democracy, isn't it? That's why I'm saying that we have the protocol, which is a very good protocol, that we don't have to be changing our governments through unconstitutional means. I agree. But when they happen, is that the way to resolve it? I've given you one resolution. Dumbuya becomes the president next week, just only next week. He's a popular guy. He may win or he may even twist whatever it is to win the election, rig the elections and win. As for that, we will accept it, isn't it? I'm saying we are getting something wrong. That's all I'm saying. We're getting something wrong. There's stampeding without necessarily helping them to prepare that. They've done it already. And they have reasons for which they say they did it. They have been accepted by portions of the society. Do you exacerbate the situation, or you help them to come back to normal?
It's a dicey matter, isn't it, Doc? Yes, Prof. If you give me a second, I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Yes, it's a dicey matter. On one hand, you should be seen being tough on those because your principles are saying every accession to power must be through free, fair, and transparent elections or means. This is not to be condoned in any way.
Sure.
When you have a military takeover, but on the other hand, we all know that Alpha Conde was heading in the wrong direction, was abusing this same protocol. And if our foreign affairs minister is comments anything to go by, we try to even speak to him and he will not budge. So how do we deal with this situation now in a way that yields the results Professor Chidancho is talking about, and also makes the statement that ECOWAS will not tolerate any form of accession to power which is not through the legitimate means?
In my view, where there is the understanding and there is the will, there will always be the way.
Okay.
The first point that we need to understand is that we do not recognize power seized by force. If we do so, there will be a cascade of coups everywhere. And we've gone through this before, mid-60s all the way to 70s. And the 80s and the 90s were lost years for us. So we don't want to go there. And I'm sure even Kenneth Domboya would understand that this is not the way to go. However, while we all agree that coups would not be accepted, we should also agree that they do happen because certain mistakes, sometimes fundamental mistakes, have been made that makes coups possible.
Okay.
And therefore, it is the duty of all of us to see how we can work together to repair the damage that has been done and which brought in the coup, and also see which way forward by getting all the stakeholders together and then getting ourselves to understand where the country stands, why it stands where it is, and where it should go, and how do we go. Making it also, putting in place democratic mechanisms by which these consultations will be held, and also that would allow them to draw up a constitution in the shortest possible time and allow them to get back into the democratic fold. But I think one point should be made very clear. We will not get an averagely good democratic system in Guinea in 1 year or 2 or 3.
Really?
It's not. You don't have the raw materials to be able to do that.
The timeline is being given now.
So you can have a transition period in which all the stakeholders work together, establish maybe a system by which over time, it will be constitutional, but over time, we would then develop the political culture that the country needs to be able to operate a proper liberal democratic systems. So there should be a transition. The transition should allow us to have a process by which democracy is not fully installed, but allows us to be able to work together in a democratic
At least there's a path towards
democracy. There's a path towards democracy. And a long period by which we grew the culture of democracy.
Dr. Vadbenton also had a problem with the language being used here.
Yes.
He felt that we should change our old ways when it comes to some of these seculars and how we respond to situations like this. Do you agree with him?
This is the beginning of a negotiation.
Okay.
And therefore you make your position clear and hard.
Oh, I see.
And then you send a delegation to go and negotiate. And when they are negotiating, they look at all the other parameters of action and all the other facts that would bring you to soften or to harden some of your positions and points. So this is the beginning of a negotiation.
There are those who have already said ECOWAS has shown clearly that it has no moral authority to make some of these demands because it knew what happened with Alpha Condé right from the beginning. It didn't stick to the people of this republic or any other republic or the sub-region that were working with Alpha Condé to make changes, but comes back only later on to enforce a part of its protocol. What do you say to those?
In a sense, there may be a case to be made for that.
Okay.
And I would rather go with the latter part of your statement. That is, the ECOWAS did not come out openly to say we're putting pressure on Alpha, we're talking to Alpha, and we would want Alpha to change, but he's not budging.
Okay.
That is right. But there is also a point which is lacking, and I think this is where what is important to note. I believe that what has happened to Alpha Condé is going to help ECOWAS to think deeper. It's probably going to help ECOWAS to bring back an exercise that they began but was not able to conclude. Which is that we would decide collectively that changing constitutions and extending mandates and all this would not be acceptable. Now, if we're able to put that clearly, and hopefully what has happened may allow some leaders to emerge within the fold and be able to push that. If we're able to push that, we would have answered the question, why didn't we do it earlier? Because why they didn't do it earlier was that they didn't have the legal mechanisms to be able to go beyond just discussing with him.
I'll come back to you, but let me get to Dr. Bombande. Doc, you were hinting of a difficulty you have with this particular inclination that and the directive that ECOWAS is giving to the military junta in Guinea today. Exactly what is your problem with what appears to be a very usual communication to a situation like this?
It is simply for the reason that the template in itself no longer responds to the challenges that we have. The challenges that we have are pervasive across the region. My colleague in the studio just mentioned the legal instruments that are required. He was referring to 2015, when Ghana at that time, President Mama was chair of ECOWAS, submitted for discussion after quite a lot of consultation that included civil society and the Committee of Ambassadors of ECOWAS, the legal framework that basically says, one, it should not be the threshold of 6 months before an election that ECOWAS should hold accountable its peers when constitutional changes begin to happen. And secondly, that no country's president or, for that matter, head of government should rule for more than 2 terms. But 2 countries stood in the way and said no, they were not going to accept it. And since we go by consensus building to reach collective decisions, we could not go further than that. Now, I give this example to now suggest that the 1-year transition period is not just about the transition, but it's about what goes into that transition. I want to give you a quick, so I want to give you a quick example. From all the conversation we've had with Antri Danso and my friend in the studio, what is a challenge is that our political principles, our value systems as a collective ECOWAS are beginning to erode. Now, if you look in the summit, there are heads of state today who were making decisions, but who themselves have disrespected the term limit. And so the moral authority to be able to make decisions on the basis of these political principles becomes challenging. So we need to go back, as my colleague in the studio said, and agree that we want to reinforce our political principles with a strict respect and observance of those principles, which requires that the protocol on good governance needs to be updated, needs to be upgraded. I say this because it is true that ECOWAS was engaging, but I also know that already in 2015, the United Nations Office for West Africa, supporting ECOWAS, was engaging in preventive diplomacy. It did not work. I want to add this other element and try to run off my point here. My friend talked about what must go into the type of arrangements. Now, let's be very honest with ourselves. And here I make a disclaimer. I don't speak for the UN. I'm an advisor, and advisors do not have decision making. So my opinion never equates to what the UN is thinking. I need to make that disclaimer.
Very well.
But in order to make my point, what I am suggesting is that the Guinean political configuration in terms of political parties was ethnicized. So you had a Malinke-dominated party led by Alpha Condé versus Selon Diallo, opposition-led party that was dominated predominantly by Fulani Pay. And so you are talking about political competition, but in reality, you are talking about an ethnic political competition, to the extent that at one point in the local parlance of Trotro in Conakry, if you were going to step in a Trotro, you needed to check whether the driver and maid were your ethnic configuration or not before you go in. That's how bad it got.
Oh, that's serious.
So, yes, so that if you are talking about a 1-year transition, Are you going to simply return to constitutional rule on the same configuration of political parties? And here, if you look at our own context in Ghana, we had a tradition, and it was affirmed by the framers of our 1992 constitution, that you cannot form a political party if the founding members are not from each of the 10 regions at that time, and it would apply to the 16 regions today.
Okay.
And what was the reason behind it? To make sure that nobody can form a party and make it regional or ethnocentric. So the constitution making in Guinea must understand the political context and the dynamics and support Guinea to come up with a constitution making process that promotes security and that promotes stability, and not just constitution. We must see the same thing in Mali, and we must, as I said, to conclude on this point, upgrade our good governance protocol so that we don't have a situation in which people try to find an excuse to escape the zero tolerance. And what was that excuse? That if the constitution is new, then I can stand again. And so you go into new constitution making. And we are not frank and honest with ourselves. So I empathize that our own president is chairing a meeting in which, as ECOWAS chair, this is the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that he's looking at the faces of leaders who themselves are not respecting good governance principles. And decisions, therefore, are made to try to bring back to the fold a country that is the second to have gone out of our convergence principles. And if we don't go deeper and hurt ourselves with the inconvenient truth in order to come out of it, this is going to spread. And it is going to spread in an already very fragile environment of rising terrorism, radicalization, violent extremism that will compound with a post-pandemic period in which economies are struggling. And to that extent, therefore, our countries will be struggling to maintain stability and security, which then directly would impact on economic growth and development.
It isn't a very straightforward system you paint there. It looks more like even the people seeking to resolve the problem have problems of their own. Yeah. Some of them have no moral authority to engage in the kind of conversation we are having. Then, Professor Vlad mentioned also, how then can we fix a problem with people whose hands are themselves not clean? How can we get the people of Guinea believing that democratic rule is the way forward for them, and making sure that that state is back to the path we want them to go? You raise concerns about the path of democracy, making it look like they are going to be allowed to go through the process on their own. How do we deal with their ethnic problems and still make sure that at least there is peace and tranquility in Guinea today?
Thank you very much. I think Dr. Bombande, my good friend, has laid bare most of the things that I said earlier. Democracy does not hinge on mathematics, as I said. Go get a constitution, get the ballot, and then back to democracy. I say that mechanical understanding of democracy is what is killing us. If ECOWAS should take a step back and look at what has happened since 1989, when they have the protocol on defense, collective defense, and that kind of thing, they should know that as soon as they wanted to have an economic community, they also needed a kind of nascent community security to go with it. And it's now unfolding, especially from the 90s onwards. We are now seeing a whole range of things telling us that we need to be very meticulous in our application of those protocols that we have enacted on ourselves. Now, the protocol we are referring to is clear. And I'm saying the mechanical application of it will not allow the specificities of Guinea, for example, to lend themselves to democratic rule. Somebody has said it all. And I said it earlier, I didn't give the details. The ethnic composition of political parties, the underlying bickering before Condé came to power and after Condé. So these are specificities that you need not sweep under the carpet and say, we have a democracy tomorrow. And as I gave you a scenario, in a scenario where Doumbouya himself steps in to become the next president, Aren't you sure by our protocol and the interpretations of it, then Guinea has a democracy? But that would be weird. He's going to go another 2 terms with all the problems that we're talking about. So we need to help them by helping and saying all kinds of assistance. Don't stampede them. If we said we went there and Conde didn't listen, can we be going and helping them, even with technical men and women, with all the Guineans, understanding that we need a constitution that has bearing for the future? Let's help them. For me, they need help. Let us not mechanically speed them to action tomorrow. Then we see the ingredients of democracy: a constitution, a ballot, and this and that and that and that. Then hooray, Guinea is gone back to democracy. It's ridiculous.
Would they require more time? Would the kind of nuanced situation we find in...
You see, democracy needs patience. Look, Ghana, we are being touted X, Y, Z. Look, we had the patience. At that time also, we didn't have all these protocols and what, but we had the patience. When we were demanding, because of the third wave of democratic calls throughout the world in the late 80s, 89, everybody was demanding a return to civilian rule. We had the patience. We allowed our constitution to be drafted. We allowed Jerry Rawlings to run elections again. We had the patience. All we needed was a constitution, credible institutions that will override personal kind of rule, so that Jerry became president, but he was ruled by the institutions of state we put there. He was ruled by a constitution. The kind of bravado and all those kind of backings were still there, but they were mitigated by the very fact that we had something to mitigate them. And now we are where we are today. Can you imagine that we have a parliament with 137 each, and we are still running? This can't happen in most of the countries around us. So democracy needs patience itself. It's not a question of time that you give it timelines, but don't give it a time. I believe gradually, if we help them within the period that we are even talking about, 18 months or 1 year, we give Mali, they must still need assistance in drawing the constitution. They must need the public, civil society to be active. And in Ghana, that's what we had. So please, let's help Guinea to come back. Let's not stampede them, because the reality on the ground is that anything can happen in any of the West African countries. And as Bombande said, listen, the arc of instability in Africa is centered in that area, the Sahel region.
Okay.
The arc of instability, and everybody is paranoid, everybody is crazy. So the democratic ethos is lost within the populations from Mauritania all the way to Nigeria. The thinking of democracy is lost. ECOWAS needs that security calmness to be able to run West Africa. If they are unable to do this, I tell you, the whole of the West African region is going to go on fire.
Now, that's a situation we'll be looking at quite quickly. But before that, Dr. Amani, you wanted to intervene when you was talking about one not stampeding getting into a false democratic dispensation, which will not have the fundamentals being dealt with properly. You disagree?
No,
okay.
I don't disagree. I just want to make this point clear. We don't know yet. We haven't seen the full communique.
Okay.
We don't know yet what is meant by 1 year transition.
Yeah, okay.
Whether it is 1 year transition or 1 year within which a plan of transition, which is agreed by all, will emerge.
Oh, okay.
And subscribed to by everybody.
That's interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
I think this is something we need to find out.
Clarify, yeah.
We need to clarify. The second is that we have gone through this before in Guinea when we stampeded a bit. And that was not the international community that was stampeding us, or the ECOWAS that was stampeding us. It was, in a way, the politicians themselves who were in a hurry to come to power. And therefore, they were not ready before President Conte died. They were not ready and willing to work together to put in place a system by which a long period of transition could have been agreed to. Even before the old man died, it could have been agreed to. Then they all opted for a coup d'etat as a solution. generally.
Oh,
Yes, they all agreed that that was the only outcome that was going to happen. And the UN more or less endorsed it. Everybody endorsed it. That is going to be a coup because there was no possibility of coming up with a period of transition. So this is what we need now. We need a framework of transition that has been prepared by all, and that takes a certain period, and step by step we implement. And the international community will support Guineans to do that. If we're able to bring something like that to fruition, I'm sure we'll be on our way, clearly, to building block by block the democracy that Guinea needs. The Guineans now, and the good news is that the old people who were in a hurry to come to power have nearly all died.
I see.
The only one remaining now is Alpha.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And because Selu belongs to the younger generation, which President Conte propelled into politics, civil servants that he put into politics. Yeah. Him, Fal, and all the others, they are the younger ones. And therefore, we believed at a certain stage that they were capable of sitting down around a plan and be able to work out a transition. It did not really happen because they were pushed by the older folk who wanted power quickly. So now it is possible that the civil society can get together on the basis of all the errors that have been committed in the last 10 years, that they will come together and be able to plan out something. There's one thing one can be sure of. In spite of all this ethnocentrism that we have in Guinea, Guineans are deeply patriotic.
Really?
Incredibly patriotic. Even to the extent that sometimes they are anti-external infiltration.
But
they've done this for
But they have a very
years.
wonderful connection with the French.
No, they have a very problematic connection with French.
I thought, but that history is there.
That history, the history of not liking the French is there.
I see.
The history of suspecting that the French have evil intentions towards them is there.
I see.
And it's grown even with the young coming up.
Yeah. So French intervention will not be a good thing.
French will not even dare intervene. Okay. They can only do it, behind. But even that won't work.
Like many suspect they are doing through Doumbouya.
No, we don't know yet. Because, you see, Doumbouya would never have come into Guinean politics if Alpha Condé had not paved the way for him. Alpha literally created what has happened.
But we can't discount his French connection.
We don't know yet. We don't know him well enough. Nobody knows this gentleman well enough.
Is that problematic for any form of intervention? That we don't know him well enough. We don't know his ideologies. We don't know what he thinks of a state-run system. We don't know whether he wishes to transition into a president or a civilian one. Is that problematic?
That is the problem we have at the moment. That's why we said, come up with a plan. Mm-hmm. Let us agree that we don't want military regime.
Okay.
We come up with a plan in which the civil society plays a major role, like they did in the last transition. Within a short period of 6 months, they were able to put constitution, parliament, and everything, temporary in power, and elect. It may not be necessary now to do elections quickly, but it may be necessary to come up with a framework within which there is a collective agreement and which bars the road to military dictatorship or military rule, but does not alienate the military. It should not. The military has grown to occupy such an important position in Guinean politics. Unfortunately so, because the country was founded on a period when the country needed to protect its territorial integrity and its independence. And they felt that military was necessary.
Even when the protocol of ECOWAS says it should be apolitical armed forces, it must be under the command of a legally constituted political authority.
But you can still have a civil regime, but have the military associated with it in one form or the other. They are not exercising power.
Okay.
But they are protecting and guarding the civil society that will exercise the temporary, the transitional period of power and ensure that the politicians, therefore, will play the game according to the rules that have been set.
Is there hope that the current structures will work? The current system that they want to put in place, is there hope that it will work?
We still don't know what he wants to put in place.
Okay.
You know, let's say it's only a week.
I get
but
you.
we think that what he's saying is this,
yes,
that he wants to put a whole comprehensive group where everybody has been consulted and they all work together. That is quite idealistic. We don't know how it's going to turn out. Yesterday, he met with all the religious leaders.
That's true.
He's been meeting with people in groups, but he hasn't come up with a plan yet.
Okay.
And that's why I'm saying, I'm sure the ECOWAS heads of states know that there are things going on. And that's why they say you come up with a plan. So let's see what plan he comes up with. Let's see how we can help him come up with a plan that does not give an undue importance to the military in the exercise of governance.
Forgive me, but I need to wrap up with this comment. And that particular question is important because there are those who are already saying, and I've heard you hint there, Dr. Bombande, that if we do not deal with the current situation properly, there is more destabilization quest on the horizon in the sub-region. Countries are likely going to be on the brink, just like we find Guinea, just like we find Mali and the other countries in the sub-region. How serious is this condition? What can we do to avert it? You've hinted that the protocol, for example, ought to be reviewed. Is that the best way out?
I think you asked a very important and fundamental question. Our voice as ECOWAS and our strength collectively has been able to take West Africa from the dark days of the civil wars that began with Liberia, then Sierra Leone, and then Cote d'Ivoire. It almost went into Guinea. We were able to do so much good work that stabilized the entire region. But as we speak with you today, if you look at our geopolitical arena internationally, things do not look good in the sense that there is friction between the United States and China, and China and Russia are beginning to revolve around their own axis versus a Western alliance. Now, we know that the last time this was intensified, the consequence was what was called the Cold War. And during the Cold War period, we were divided as Africans. And at political leadership, you only needed legitimacy from one of the superpowers of the Cold War, and then you could do whatever you wanted and get away with it. If we see the geopolitics going back, I'm not suggesting that there is a Cold War yet, but the signs are not good. What then begins to happen? And let me give you another quick example. As we speak, it is not confirmed, but there are stories about the Malian military engaging in a bilateral conversation with Wagner.
Yes, with the Russians.
Now, Wagner is is what you would call a non-state actor, but a military non-state actor that is hired to fight wars. And we know what they have done in Central African Republic. We know that if they come into Mali, we should be able to predict what is likely going to happen. Can they do that without an ECOWAS heads of state, heads of authority, and government's approval? So you are already beginning to see the signs in which the geopolitics is eating into how to exploit a divide. We know that Mamadi Doumbouya, again, I'm not reading too much into it. One of the first people he met was the Russian ambassador to Guinea. I'm not reading too much into it. But all I'm saying is, it's our collective will and collective response to our crisis that will save West Africa. And to that extent, we must commend our ECOWAS leaders for not hesitating, but getting engaged and seized by these challenges. Because if we allow the geopolitics to seep into what is already there, then our voice will split. And people then begin to go along with their patrons and their patronage. And that will make the situation even worse.
Now,
Yeah. So yes.
yeah,
Yes.
Professor Chidanso, do you agree?
Well, to a very large extent. Let me explain one or two things that the two gentlemen have said. Geopolitics is on the rise, and one of them said there's no Cold War yet. There is what is called the colder war. The colder war because it's more devastating. Geopolitics is being used everywhere. It's true. Dumbuya had met with the Russian. Said it's not confirmed yet. It's confirmed. He met with the Russian ambassador. Wagner is a kind of a replica of the American Blackwater, which were used strongly in devastating Iraq.
Okay.
And that is geopolitics. So the Russians have replicated it one way or the other. I think it's not government which is doing it. They've been able to get Central African Republic. They've been to Mozambique. Now they are in Mali. In essence, they do not want the West to have a stranglehold on the whole world. So what Dr. Bombade is saying is very true. If ECOWAS is unable to get the region united, stable, then you expect geopolitics to play a role, and that is what is happening. I can imagine Dumbuya looking for his own security too, in the sense that if we stampede him too much, he knows the Guinean mentality is that it is against France. And the French will be wary. French might want to exploit him if he allows it. But he knows that he's not going to get the people to support me that way. I wouldn't be surprised if Wagner is able to get him and assure him of his security.
Wow.
So these are some of the permutations that you can analyze when you are a watcher, a security watcher or international politics watcher. You know that these things are all possible. And that is why in our backyard, ECOWAS must study the situation, have the patience to know where all these things can lead to, and help them to come back in the normal way that we want, rather than stampede them. My colleague in the studio told you about how we did it before. We made a wishy-washy thing. 6 months, we are back. And I guess with the same scenario, we can do this within 1 week and call it democracy. We can do it 1 week. Dumbuya can announce that next Friday we are having elections, and ECOWAS will send observers, free and fair. They will bring a report, and he's in the seat.
Okay.
Will that be democratic enough? And that is why I think all three of us are in one accord, saying that look, there's no need stampeding. We need to study the history of it. We need to study our own actions, how it has gone. They have gone. Did we succeed? If we didn't, do we have to tweak the protocol and add on to it to ensure that these things don't happen again? That is very important.
Prof, I am grateful to you. And Dr. Bombande, I'm grateful to you too.
Very welcome.
Very briefly, can you wrap up for me, Dr. Mani?
Just 3 quick points. The first point is this, that there is a collective understanding in Guinea that they want a period of transition.
Okay.
And I believe the coup leader has also made it clear that he wants a transition.
Okay.
The second is that the civil society and the politicians don't want a military man taking over power and remaining a long time.
Yes, sir.
So that is what also we all want. And the third is that we want a move towards a more democratic systems, collectively having planned and having worked towards it. And therefore, I think we need
to delve into the problem in the sub-region more deeper in the future. But thank you so much, Dr. Mani. Thank you, folks, for joining us on today's edition of Upfront.